Dark horses. Dark horses. Welcome into the Voice of College Football, best discussion, debate, and analysis of the sport that we all love. Please like the video and subscribe. We've done this in previous off seasons, identified dark horses for the college football playoff, but 2024 and beyond is a completely different deal. So let's look at the 10-year run of the 4-team field to see when a dark horse emerged and made the college football playoff. I would say that there's only been 3. 2021 Michigan. Of course, Michigan's not a dark horse by definition historically. They're a blue blood. They're one of the elites of college football. But that particular Michigan team, of course, coming off 2-4, not ranked in the preseason top 25, won the Big Ten, made the college football playoff. Dark horse that made it. In that same season, we had Cincinnati playing in the other semifinal game. And of course, as a group of 5 team that made it finally a G5 school, making the field of 4, they were a dark horse of sorts. But the situation is, of course, evolved and changed. And the rules have changed for 2024 and beyond, where there is a group of 5 that will be selected. So there's a guaranteed spot for the group of 5. Before it was based on the College Football Playoff Committee's rankings and their selection, their judgment and in identifying a group of 5 team that could be selected. So again, completely different deal when we look at group of 5 teams in 2024 and beyond, because one will be selected. And then finally in 2022, a 5-7 TCU team from the previous season ascended to the college football playoff with only 1 loss. So those would be the 3 during the 10-year era of the 4-team field that I would consider to be dark horses that made it. All right, let's look at 2024. And so the situation has changed. And so the definition for me of a dark horse is much different, because you don't have to make a 4-team field. You got to make a 12-team field. So there is much more opportunity. Therefore, the depths of the dark horse has to be considered further down. No longer is Tennessee a dark horse. They were for a 4-team field, but not for a 12-team field, for example. All right, let's get into it. Let's start with the ACC, and let's also understand 2 different paths here. We've got the conference championship path, and then we also have the at-large path. So let's focus on teams that could possibly pull off a conference championship that are certainly not a darling according to the Vegas odds. And let's start with the ACC, and let's consider what needs to happen here. Forget about non-conference games. Non-conference games do not count. They don't matter toward winning a conference championship. You could go 0-4 outside the conference, win the conference, and make the college football playoff. There was a 6-4-1 UCLA team that ascended all the way to the Rose Bowl in 1983. They lost 3 non-conference games. They won the Pac-12, the Pac-10 at the time, and went to the Rose Bowl. And people were like, how did this 6-4-1 team make the Rose Bowl? That's why we're looking at the same sort of equation possibility with especially the Big 12 and the ACC in reaching a college football playoff. We start with Virginia Tech. Coming off 7-6 last year, Brent Pry doing a nice job in recruiting. Of course, we're focused on 2024 with Kyron Drones back at quarterback, accounted for 22 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. They are one of the top returning teams in all of college football in regards to returning production. Now let's look at the schedule. The Hokies will be favored in all 4 non-conference games. They lost to Rutgers last year by 3 scores on the road. They get them in Blacksburg this time around. But again, the path is not as an at-large. The path is as a conference champion. So the minefield here is a trip to Hard Rock Stadium on a Friday night to take on Miami. They also have a ton of winnable games after that, including a bye between Stanford, Boston College, Georgia Tech, and Syracuse, all games that they have to win. They've got Clemson at home. That's a possible upset bid right there, even if they are, in fact, a underdog at that point in the season, the first week of November. Much could change, but right now they're a pretty substantial underdog to a Clemson team that is a semi-co-favorite for the ACC championship. But then they get the bye week leading into the final 2 weeks of the season. Not difficult right there at Duke and Virginia. So if we're just basing this on odds, if we're just basing this on preseason point spreads, Miami would be the favorite against Virginia Tech, and the Hokies would also be the underdog against Clemson. That looks at 6-2. They pull off one of those upsets. They're a 7-1 football team and could make the ACC championship game. And so the formula here for these ACC teams is to not necessarily have the best record in the conference to win the championship, but have the second best record in the conference or win a tiebreaker to get to the conference championship game and then upset Florida State. That's the formula we're looking at for Virginia Tech and also for NC State. Most college football observers, both fan and media, think of NC State the same today as they did 5 years ago, but this is a different football program under Dave Doeren. Consider that while they were reaching bowl games as typically a 7-5 team over Dave Doeren's tenure, they only won 21 of their first 56 ACC games under Dave Doeren. But now they've won 23 of the last 34, so they've taken 21-35 in the ACC and made it 23-11. This is a much better football program. And now they've got a quarterback, a dual threat quarterback in Grayson McCall, one of the most prolific quarterbacks in the history of college football, coming in from Coastal Carolina. Let's check out NC State coming off a 9-4 season. There's no Florida State, no Virginia Tech, no Louisville on the schedule. After September, they've got a cakewalk, and again, forget the Tennessee game. That's a non-conference game. It's all about getting to the conference championship game, so lose to Tennessee by 50 points and then get to the conference championship game. Once we get into October, NC State's going to be a favorite in every one of these games, and if they're not, then forget them being a dark horse for the college football playoff. Look at that run of games. Northern Illinois, Wake Forest, Syracuse, at Cal. That's a tough road trip all the way to the West Coast that they're not accustomed to. Then they've got a bye week. Stanford, Duke, both of those home games. Then they've got a bye week. And then they've got Georgia Tech and North Carolina. And the Tar Heels are supposed to be down this year as compared to previous Mac Brown teams. They don't play anyone who probably will sniff the top 25 after that September 21st date at Clemson. I also forgot to mention that in addition to not playing Florida State, Virginia Tech, and Louisville, there's no Miami on the schedule. So while the formula that I am focusing on is getting to the ACC championship game, consider this, that if NC State splits against Tennessee and Clemson, they could win the rest of those games. Let's say they lose out on a tiebreaker to get to the ACC championship game at 7-1, but they finish 11-1. And they're still a candidate for the college football playoff, certainly at 11-1. Can you imagine that? A non-conference championship game participant goes 11-1 and makes the field out of the ACC. The transition from the group of five to the Power Five has historically been a difficult one. The most recent example is only 1 year old. Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, BYU, 34-19 combined in their final year in the group of five. 34-19, 8-28 as members of the Big 12. That's a tough transition. You only have to look back 10 or 12 years to Utah and TCU. They finally became successes in the Power Five. Really good programs right now. However, their initial transition from the Group of Five to the Power Five was rough. So we are looking at SMU. They went undefeated in the toughest conference in the Group of Five, the American, minus Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF, of course. So nowhere close to the difficulty pre-2023. 9-0, but consider this. To our point, SMU went 0-3 against Power 5 opponents last season. Now they're going to try to get the job done in the ACC. Let's check out the schedule with a returning quarterback in Preston Stone. Again, the path is most likely to get to the ACC championship game and pull off an upset. The non-conference schedule, though, is weak. Nevada, HCU, and BYU, also a date against TCU, and SMU has played them extremely well in recent years. They do have Florida State and Louisville. Ouch. After that, it lightens up considerably. Pull off an upset, SMU, in the first 2 weeks of ACC play. Go 1-1, split FSU and Louisville. If you can get that done, Stanford's winnable. Duke, Pitt, they've got the bye week before Boston College, Virginia, and Cal. Look at all those winnable games for SMU. Could it be? Well, it would be remarkable. SMU to the ACC championship game, and then they have that one shot in 3.5 hours to pull off the upset and get to the college football playoff. It's going to be intriguing to see how many teams make it out of the ACC and the Big 12, because conventional thinking would be that we would get 2 participants out of those conferences. If you look at the last 10 to 15 years in college football, especially the last 10 years, because we've got those college football playoff committee rankings to rely on, then we can see where typically the runner-up in the ACC or the Big 12 would make a 12-team field. However, the consolidation of the Big 10 and the SEC taking from the Pac-12 has made it even more difficult. And then we also got to consider what would have happened last year. Louisville lost the ACC championship game. They would have missed a 12-team field. Oklahoma State got buried by 4 touchdowns against Texas in the Big 12 championship game. At 9-4, they weren't even close to a 12-team field, so it could be rather difficult. So with the Big 12, again, we are looking for a championship path. Let's go to Iowa State. Bounce back year of sorts for Matt Campbell's team last year at 7-6. They lost the bowl game to Memphis. They lost to Ohio University as well. They played much better in the Big 12. They've got an excellent quarterback coming back in Rocco Becht, who set all sorts of Iowa State records. They've got the running back. They've got the wide receivers, who are some of the top pass catchers in the Big 12. They've got 19 of 22 starters. And look at this schedule. No Oklahoma State, no Kansas State, no Arizona. They do have a difficult home stretch to deal with, but we've got some faith in Matt Campbell, still one of the best coaches in college football. Iowa State loses their rivalry game to Iowa 70 to 80% of the time at least, and they've got this date at Kinnick. That's going to be difficult to navigate. But again, we are looking at a conference championship path. The conference slate is light. Houston, Baylor, West Virginia, UCF before a bye week. Yes, a trip to Morgantown is difficult. Texas Tech, Kansas, Cincinnati. Okay, yes, the stretch drive. We focus on that. At Utah and Kansas State. That's a difficult one to navigate to get to the Big 12 championship game. However, there's so much parity in this league that you could see, let's say, a 6-3 tiebreaker for second place in the Big 12. Don't discount that. Let's say one team jumps out at 8-1 or 7-2, Utah, and then we've got like 4, 3, 6-3 teams, and then there's a wild tiebreaker. And if you win the critical games against the key opponents that you are in that tie with, then you land in the Big 12 championship game. Could be one of those crazy years in the Big 12. There's just that much balance within the conference, and Iowa State certainly has a puncher's chance. This next program is certainly no stranger to being an underdog. They've been an underdog their entire history, certainly recently, and they finally broke through with a good season under Lance Leipold. Their best season since 2007 at 9-4. But while they are no stranger to being an underdog, they're also no stranger to being listed as a dark horse for the college football playoff. So we will include the Kansas Jayhawks. Jalen Daniels, their star quarterback, only played 3 games last year, so his health is critical. Devin Neal ran for almost 1,300 yards and 16 touchdowns. They've got 8 of their 9 top receivers back and 130 starts along the offensive line. There is no Utah on the schedule. There is no Oklahoma State on the schedule. And if there is one school in this conference that could break free from the pack and be by far the best, it would be Utah. So no Utah on the schedule is always key here in 2024. Again, forget about the non-conference games, although it looks good on the record, and Kansas should be able to go 3-0 with a somewhat tricky trip to Champaign, Illinois. West Virginia, TCU, Arizona State, those first 2 games in the Big 12 going to be difficult because, again, the parity across the board is ridiculous, and there's no clear-cut favorite in most of these games. Kansas State, of course, on the road. Iowa State after a bye week to prepare. The stretch drive is pretty easy. BYU. Tricky date, though, in November, going to Provo, Colorado, and Baylor. Kansas certainly has the team. They've got the talent. They've got the playmakers on offense, and they've got the coach to make a run in the Big 12 and be a dark horse for the college football playoff. As you know, we have no favorites here at the Voice of College Football. We cover the sport unbiasedly. We are neutral. But, yeah, I do have my favorite coach. Leave your comment down in the comment section below if you know who my favorite current college football coach is. I do have a favorite all-time player. If you know that as well, please leave it in the comment section below. And yes, you've noticed that we've had our logo here for the entire video, but I do have a favorite when it comes to our dark horse selections. This would just be fascinating to me. RJ Harvey, 1,400 yards, 16 touchdowns. KJ Jefferson, undervalued quarterback at Arkansas. 21 touchdowns, 4 picks, 21 touchdowns, 5 picks. 2 consecutive years for Sam Pittman. He can quarter and truck a safety in the secondary at the blink of an eye. This could be an explosive, dynamic offense under Gus Malzahn. And in the Big 12, just need to be good enough on defense. And they bring back 8 starters on defense, plus some key additions through the transfer portal. The schedule looks like this for UCF. We don't care about the non-conference games because it's about getting to the Big 12 championship game. They go on the road to TCU. That's a difficult assignment there. After the bye week, they've got Colorado traveling all the way from Boulder to Orlando. They definitely have a manageable stretch in the middle of the season, although traveling to Ames, Iowa is never an easy task, especially when you're coming from Orlando, Florida. But there's no Kansas, and there is no Kansas State on this schedule for UCF, and it may come down to a final home appearance against the best team in the conference, most likely in Utah. So imagine this, UCF fans. You should have been given a shot in 2017 as an undefeated team, and in 2018 as an undefeated football team. And now in 2024, you could go 9-4 with the Big 12 championship and make the college football playoff. Okay, so those are the Power 4 teams out of the ACC and the Big 12 that we see a path as a championship game winner. That is the best path. Let's understand that if you play in the Big 10 or the SEC and you go 9-3 and you look extremely impressive against the best teams, you could get into the playoff. If you go 10-2 out of those 2 conferences, you will be in the playoff. Let's look at the SEC. I don't have any great dark horse candidates because I just don't think that certain teams have any shot. So I'm not going to list Florida as a dark horse. Yes, they are the darkest of horses because they've got the most brutal schedule in college football, but I just don't think that they have a shot. So I'm not listing teams here that have no shot, but I'm also not going to list somebody like Mizzou or Tennessee because I believe that they have a legitimate team that is one of the 10 or 15 best teams in the country. I'm talking about dark horses here, but let's give it a look when it comes to Texas A&M coming off 7-6. Mike Elko's an excellent coach. Connor Weigman's a really good quarterback, needs to stay healthy, and that's up to the offensive line as well, which was porous last year. For Texas A&M, there's no Georgia, no Bama, no Tennessee on the schedule, and the defense should be rather good, as it typically is. And, of course, Mike Elko certainly can coach that side of the football, but for Texas A&M to get to 10-2 is going to be a rather difficult assignment. So in this scenario, unlike the other ones, the non-conference games do factor in because we are looking at a non-conference champion. So Texas A&M has to beat Notre Dame because they also have LSU and Texas on the schedule. They're going to be underdogs in those games. The Mizzou game is going to be a difficult one to navigate as well, as the Tigers are tough, loaded on offense. And we're not even speaking of situations where Texas A&M has to go on the road in October to Mississippi State and South Carolina. Of course, they've got the date against Auburn. That game's on the road as well. Most likely, the formula is going to be big win against Notre Dame non-conference, and then you lose to LSU and Texas, or you pull off an upset against one of those two. And both of those games are at home, and then maybe you trip up on the road or elsewhere against Mizzou, Auburn, or somebody else, and Texas A&M's able to navigate 10-2. We're going to know so much more about this football team after they play Notre Dame. That night is going to determine, okay, do we keep an eye on Texas A&M or do we discard them for the rest of the season in regards to a college football playoff appearance? Year 2 under any capable head coach is supposed to be a drastic improvement. Hugh Freeze, Auburn, you're up. We know that the offense has to be better, especially in the passing game. The rush game was really good, Jarquez Hunter and a capable offensive line, but Peyton Thorne has to be better. Hugh Freeze has had an entire offseason to elevate one of the worst passing attacks in all of college football. Cam Coleman is the prized addition at wide receiver, but the schedule doesn't set up. I'm including Auburn because I believe that they have the opportunity to be a vastly improved team, but they've got Bama, Georgia, Oklahoma. But again, I really like the team. We serve up the Auburn Tigers, War Eagle, college football playoff, dark horse. Let's move to the Big Ten. If this team finds an offense, any offense, they could find a college football playoff spot. Who do you think we're talking about? New offensive coordinator Tim Lester takes over an Iowa offense, one of the worst in the nation for the last 4 or 5 years. Quarterback battle between Cade McNamara, who knows championship play in the Big Ten at Michigan, and Brendan Sullivan, who is a Big Ten quarterback in Northwestern, completed 69% of his passes in 200 pass attempts. Iowa usually lives in that 50% range. That would be a vast improvement. They might have the best linebacking core in the country. They have one of the top secondary units in the country. The defense will be exceptional once again. Let's look at the schedule. This is amazing. They've got a date in Columbus against Ohio State. Otherwise, they do not play what are expected to be the 4 best teams in the conference. No Michigan, no Penn State, no Oregon, no USC. Again, the non-conference record is going to play a pivotal role. You've got to win all these games, including the date against Iowa State. After that, in Big Ten play, date at Columbus, play well, look good, lose by a touchdown or 2, survive, don't get injured. The date at Wisconsin's a difficult one, of course. Washington, they're a mystery team, of course, having lost practically their entire team. A trip to the Rose Bowl against UCLA will not be easy for an offense that has been impeded in the past to try to pull off a game against what was a better UCLA defense, one of the best in the nation last year. And then the stretch drive is nothing daunting at Maryland and Nebraska. Again, consider this, Big Ten schedulers. What were you doing? Iowa does not play for the 5 best teams in the conference. Therefore, there is the path to the college football playoff. Rutgers says, I can do you one better, Iowa. The Scarlet Knights coming off 7-6 last season. A bowl win against Miami. Greg Schiano knows how to coach. He knows how to build a program. He knows how to play to his strengths. Gavin Wimsatt, dual threat quarterback, only completed 47% of his passes. He's out the door to Kentucky. Ethan Kalkumanis, only a 53% passer at Minnesota. So Rutgers is obviously making a decision here. We've got to be able to throw the ball better to compete in the Big Ten. We can no longer have a running back playing quarterback. So Kalkumanis is an upgrade, but he needs to be a substantial upgrade because they lose the running threat at quarterback. Defense, special teams, offensive line, the whole deal is solid. But again, let's look at the schedule. Who in the Big Ten office is a Rutgers fan? No Ohio State, no Michigan, no Penn State, no Oregon, no Iowa. There's a trip to USC on a Friday night. Big deal. The rest of it are all teams that, of course, Rutgers could possibly handle. They beat Virginia Tech at home last year, 35-16. Now, they got outgained. They had a crazy game in which they created turnovers. It's going to be a more difficult assignment at Lane Stadium this time around. Then they got to turn around and play Washington. So I'm not saying that this is a probable notion, but again, they got to take advantage of this schedule because it's not a cake schedule. Washington, Nebraska, Wisconsin is nothing to sneeze at. But again, they missed the top 5 schools, arguably. You could argue USC in place of Iowa, but still, these are all games Rutgers could win, they could lose. I am serving them up as a dark horse, but they could be 2-5 after week 7. Or they could be 6-1 or 7-0 after week 7. And then they finish off with this stretch. While everybody's beating up each other in the Big Ten, they've got Minnesota, Maryland, Illinois, and Michigan State. Rutgers, I don't know if you can make a bid for the college football playoff because it's going to take 10-2, but you can at least win 8 or 9 games because if you don't do it this year, you're never going to do it. Again, you miss 5 of the best teams in the Big Ten, probably the 5 best, or at least 5 of the top 6. Maybe you throw in Wisconsin and Rutgers has to deal with Luke Fickell's bunch. So that's a crazy one to finish off, but it sets up as well as it possibly could for Greg Schiano. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Please like the video and subscribe on your way out. And we will continue to analyze the game we all love each and every day with you. Check out the schedule. We post it on the community page every day so you know when to join us live, or do it the easy way. Subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live. We've got the Big Ten Live Show every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. See you then.